crash came in 1637, but it wasn't about oil or gold. It was about flowers, tulips. The price skyrocketed, with single bulbs selling for up to £10,000. Tulip mania, as it became known, saw prices rise by 300% overnight, and in the morning, they were worth nothing. Proportionally, the biggest crash Europe has ever seen. The people who were buying these bulbs were part of the new middle class, and they had money to spend on ostentatious displays of wealth. Next after tulips, it was art. Underlying this 17th century showmanship was a sense of post-Reformation anxiety and disquiet about money and morals, wealth and sin. Born out of this uneasy climate was still life, descriptive, normative, contemplative.
The first in our series of art in Oxford will be exploring the Ward collection of the Ashmolean Museum. The Ward collection houses 95 still life paintings, ranging from the 17th century to the 19th century. The conventional subject matter seems to be fruit and flowers, everyday objects. But there is more to still life than meets the eye.
My name is Christopher Brown. I'm the director of the Ashmolean Museum, and my speciality is Dutch and Flemish 17th century painting. For many years I was the curator of Dutch and Flemish painting at the National Gallery. And this is the greatest collection of Dutch and Flemish 17th century still life painting in any museum in the world. It tells the story of still life painting in the 17th century in the Netherlands. It's the Ward collection, which was given to the Ashmolean in 1939. This really was a most extraordinary gift. And just to give some sense that you could tell the whole story of Dutch still life painting, Flemish still life painting from the collection here, this is a painting by one of the earliest still life painters in the North Netherlands, in the Dutch Republic in the 17th century. This is a man called Ambrosius Bosschaert, who worked in Middelburg. And this is painted very much in the Antwerp manner. And essentially, to characterize that manner, it's the very specific description of individual flowers here. I mean, you can see how the tulips are very particularly described. I mean, it's actually where botanical illustration meets painting.
So does still life have its own story?
Still life has its own story. It has an internal story. In some sense, clearly one artist looks at another artist. But it does change very significantly during the course of the 17th century.
Has the development got something to do with the socio-economic conditions?
It has, absolutely. I mean, clearly this is all to do with the emergence of a successful merchant class in the Dutch Republic. And also, one of the most remarkable facts about the Republic is that the money does trickle down. I mean, there are upper working class groups who had disposable income and who spent some of that disposable income on works of art. This is a painting by Clara Peters, so a female artist working in the Netherlands in the early 17th century. We don't know a lot about her, disappointingly, because she clearly was a major figure. We know that because this is painted on copper. It's painted on a large copper panel. That must have been extremely expensive. She's showing off her skill, I mean, undoubtedly showing off her virtuosity. And this is really one of her great masterpieces.
So why is still life in general sort of the forgotten genre compared to a history painting?
Still life painting, if you look at the famous theoretical treatise by Samuel van Hoogstraten, published in 1678, he describes still life painters as the foot soldiers of the army of painters. Ink has been spilt on the whole question of what these pictures mean and whether they do have a meaning. Now, there are some of them evidently contain memento mori elements, and you see very familiar images within them, say clocks, snuffed out candles, skulls, I mean, exactly what you might expect, which do suggest mortality. To what extent people actually hung those pictures on their walls and looked at them and contemplated mortality, I always find rather difficult to understand. I mean, were these in some way an aid to thinking about your latter end and then, you know, as it were, behaving properly as a consequence of that? I wonder, really. I think it becomes a genre of painting which doesn't exactly lose its meaning, but becomes somewhat sort of cliched, and in some sense those elements become almost traditional elements, and their intense value, as it were, changes. The Ward collection, of course, is just one of 70 galleries in the Ashmolean, which now, particularly after the redevelopment, is a very large museum. Being at Oxford is being involved in teaching, and teaching individuals about these great works of art, which I look after, as it were, and I very much enjoy that aspect of my job, and I hope it's been illuminating and interesting for you.
Thank you very much. But the story of still life doesn't end with the Dutch Republic. Perhaps such endurance tells us more about our anthropological condition than our aesthetic tastes. The thread of continuity here seems to be a tension between beauty and death, an extended dialogue between art and its public that is layered in biblical, classical, and contemporary meaning, underpinned by a sense of the inevitable. The notions of transitory life, of fleeting materiality, still attract us today, even if it's unlikely that the price of tulips will ever reach such dizzying heights again. The memento mori is a familiar theme in the work of many artists, from Caravaggio to Damien Hirst, and in many genres too, from portraiture to pop art. Also known as a vanitas, the ephemeral nature of earthly pleasures is now well familiar to us in a formal gallery context. And yet what catches and holds the viewer's eye when it comes to still life is its domesticity. This raises questions not just about the place of still life in the 21st century consciousness, but also about our relationship with art. We're here today with Tanja Moderschiem, who is a contemporary still life artist working in London in the style of the Dutch Grand Masters. She's here with us today because she's exhibiting at the Oxford International Art Fair.
I've always been very interested in anatomy and detail, and my background is in science. And what I like so much about still life painting, it elevates the mundane, the ordinary object. This painting I build up in layers and glazes. So I start off with a monochrome layer to sort out the darks and the lights, and then I build up layers of colored paint, and in the end glazes to make the painting really glow.
What sort of market do you cater to?
The residential market, but also the hospitality market. I'm looking to get my still lifes into restaurants, boutique hotels, and things like that. It becomes something to contend with, something to look at, and that's also what I want to reach in my still life, that people stop and look at the everyday things, and then appreciate the simple things in life rather than rushing around and working in a rat race. So that's, I think, also the function of good still lives and all art, to make people stop and think and look.
Still life sees the everyday object elevated. The search for symbolic meaning in the painting is perhaps displaced by a more subtle understanding of how we look and think about the world around us. Part of still life's appeal is its open and unpretentious presentation of the familiar. This is a world away from the convulsive theatricality of the Baroque. In looking at still life, both in the museum and as a living art form, we've hoped to open up a discussion about how we look at art, according to the space in which we encounter it, and perhaps how our moral compass is positioned accordingly. It seems like something human always draws us back to still life.